Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm beyond excited to talk to Anthony Horowitz again about his new book, Marble Hall Murders. Anthony is a New York Times bestseller, and he writes both in the adult and young adult fiction world. Is there a big difference between writing for adults and young adults?
Oh, that's a good question to start with, Dan. I think there are more similarities than differences. That's the honest truth of it. I mean, for me, it's about pace, it's about storytelling, it's about gripping the reader, and it's about the flow of the narrative and all that. And the difference is maybe in language occasionally and in content, of course. There are some things you don't want to put into a book for young people. But by and large, when I'm writing, I'm not thinking about these things. I'm thinking about the story. And in both cases, that's where my interests lie.
I totally love it. So I want to thank you extra special because last year at Thanksgiving, I went to a family reunion. As I do, I question everybody about everything. So I was asking my younger cousins what they were reading. And Dax said he was reading Alex Rider. And I said, oh, by Anthony Horowitz. All of a sudden, his face lit up. I became a rock star because of you. I thank you very much for that.
That's a lovely story, Dan. Thank you for sharing.
All of a sudden, I just wasn't the way older cousin. I was actually the cool cousin. I'm like, I love this. So, and
that is nice.
He really, really is a super fan. So I am
very proud of the reach of the Alex Rider books over the years. You know, I've sold 25 million copies of the Alex Rider, the 14 different adventures, and I think about 30 countries. And I'm so proud of the fact that the books have helped to bring young people into the world of reading, because you and I both know how important books are and how important reading is to life and to happiness and to everything, really. So, you know, Alex has been a bit of a trigger in that way, and I'm very proud that I was the one who pulled it.
I am as well. You know, I think that I look back on my childhood and I think of all the books that inspired me and how much that formed my life going forward. And when I say to someone, what are you reading? And they say to me, oh, I don't really read very much. I sort of breaks my heart because I'm like, you're missing out on so much of the world. Read more. Television is great, but reading, you get to escape to a different world because it uses a different part of your brain.
But also the other thing is that reading is one of the most creative things you can do. I always say that reading and writing are almost identical in the amount of creativity they demand. And to somebody who doesn't read, I say, do you not realize what you're missing out on? This is a chance for your brain to do a miracle, to take hieroglyphics, letters, and make them into words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, paragraphs into chapters, to build a universe, to fill it with people, to hear those people, to see those people, to imagine them, to know them. All done with your brain. Yes, the writer has provided, as it were, the blueprint, but it is you doing all this. And do you really think you're going to get the same sort of satisfaction and the same excitement out of television, film, a computer game, whatever? No. I mean, you are doing some of the heavy lifting, and it is a wonderful feeling. But, I don't need to tell you this because I know you believe it anyway. But I have the same feeling as you. If I meet somebody who just shrugs, and even my own kids, I have to sort of twist their arms to come on, guys, we're going on holiday, pack a book. But if I meet somebody who really doesn't read, I feel sort of a sense they're missing out.
I agree. And I think, what a wonderful thing books do for us. They can transport us to places we've never been. I mean, I've not been to the south of France. I've been to Paris. But, Magpie Murders takes place a little bit in the south of France. We have all of these things that come to us. We get to discover worlds that we may never see, or it may encourage us to go and see that part of the world.
Well, that is absolutely true. When the Da Vinci Code came out, Dan Brown's great bestseller, loads of people were leaving the States and other parts of the world to travel to some of the locations in Paris and other parts of France and Europe. And they did it because the story took them there. But goodness knows what they learned when they got there. They may not have found the Holy Grail, which is what's described in the book, but they will have found all sorts of treasures. That's for sure.
It's the treasures, I think, that are so wonderful. So give the audience a little bit of a setup about what Marble Hall Murders is about.
Well, I will assume you have read Magpie Murders and Moonflower Murders, which are the first two books in the series. Marble Hall Murders is a standalone book, so you don't have to have read them. But if you have, you will know that Susan Ryeland, the main character, is an editor who has the misfortune to get herself involved quite often in murder. And this time it happens when she comes back to England, having left her home in Crete and having split up with her boyfriend, returning to London. And she's hired as a freelance editor to work with a young writer who is going to produce a continuation novel. Alan Conway, her old writer, is no more, and this young writer is taking over. And the young writer is called Eliot Crace. He's a grandson of the greatest writer who ever lived, a huge children's author by the name of Miriam Crace. But Eliot knows two things. The first thing is that his grandmother was not the dear, sweet thing that everybody in the world believed she was. She was a monster. And the second thing he knows is that somebody killed her, and he hides the identity of that person inside his new book, which once again plunges poor Susan Ryeland into danger.
So you do this as an author, which I think is so creative. You create unique situations. And by that, I mean, like in this and all three of these books, there's a puzzle within a puzzle. And in your Hawthorne and Horowitz series, you are a character. So what about that puzzle aspect delights you as an author?
Well, I think what you're talking about here is metafiction, which is what I seem to be sort of doing a lot of the time. I didn't even know the word until I read critics saying, well, that was what I was doing. And when I looked it up and said, well, yes, I am, because I'm both writing murder mystery stories, full of clues and suspects and red herrings and revelations and twists and turns and all the rest of it. But at the same time, I'm writing about the nature of writing it, about the nature of murder mystery, why we read it, and how a murder mystery novel works. And I've been trying for a very long time now to do something more than just do a straightforward, here's a killing, here are the suspects, oh, a detective has arrived, he's asking lots of questions, and now he's worked it out, that's the solution, thank you for reading my book. There's nothing wrong with that. I love Golden Age crime, I love murder mysteries of all sorts, but what I am trying to do is to do things that haven't been done before. Hence, with these Magpie and Moonflower and now Marble Hall, the book inside the book, which is quite a neat little device. It allows me to both write a 1950s novel and a 21st century novel, and for the two of them to coexist. Or, as you say, in the Hawthorne novels, where I myself am the character of sort of Watson to his Sherlock Holmes, that allows me again to view the whole murder upside down. Instead of being the cleverest person in the book, the author who knows who the murderer is before the murder is committed, I'm now the most stupid person in the book in a way, because I know nothing. If Hawthorne doesn't solve the crime, I don't have a book. So I'm 5 steps behind him. I'm nervous, I'm angsty, and I'm not having the best of times because I just don't seem capable of surviving in that world. But the books are a great deal of fun as a result.
I love them. I love both premises. And I think I will say, as I said earlier, you've created something that's different. You once again engage so many aspects of our brain to be involved with following along with you as the author. You share a story with us and we get to participate. And that's always fun because I'm a big, I don't want to say gamer, but I play a lot of what I call mental games. I'm getting to that age where I think I better stimulate every part of my brain that I can get hold of. So, I love that puzzle. I love the puzzle aspect of it.
I've always loved magic, illusion, puzzle. I like word games. I like secrets. I have a secret passage in this very room I'm sitting in now. I love the idea that life is more complicated than you might think, that things that are ordinary might conceal all sorts of secrets and tricks. I collect puzzle boxes. I love things with secret compartments in them, all that sort of stuff. And in my writing, I want to say one thing to those listening, which is that my books are not complicated. They're not, they're not intellectually that demanding, but they do try to be, they're entertainments first and foremost, but they do try to be, shall we say, tricksy. I like surprises. I like sleight of hand in my writing.
And I love that as a reader, because that way, as I said, I'm very, very invested. And of course, I want to figure out who done it along with, as the clues are given, I want to try to figure it out myself. It stimulates me to do that. I think that's one of the reasons why I always gravitate towards murder mystery and suspense. It's not that I don't like romance and other types of books. I just particularly prefer that particular genre.
Yeah, well, I think crime still remains the most popular genre in fiction. And there are many reasons for this, but I think one of them, and it's something that you're sort of hinting at, is that when you're reading a crime novel, you're standing shoulder to shoulder with the main character. You're following his or her journey through the story, and you have exactly the same aim, which is to discover the truth at the end of the story. And if it's a sort of crime novel that I like, whatever the detective knows, you know, but maybe you don't know you know it. And that's the fun of it. So it's a sort of a journey done side by side. I can't think of in a romance you mentioned, you're looking at two people who are in love, and you may enjoy their story, but you're not being asked to sort of, participate in the embrace, as it were.
That's right. And romance has a formula to it to be successful. And so once you figured out what that formula is, they're all going to fit within that formula in some way. You just have a different set of characters.
That is true, and but you could say that crime fiction also does have a formula. I even know what that formula is: A plus B equals C. I've said it often enough. A is one person, B is another person, C is the reason why A murders B. It's as simple as that. But there are so many different ways of interpreting that formula and adapting it and changing it and doing things differently. And look at Agatha Christie. She took those little 3 stitches and just created a whole world of different stories out of them.
That's right. So I recently saw an author who gave a talk, and she was talking about in her career, she'd had a lot of different editors. For whatever reason, she hadn't had like one long-standing editor. And she said that she felt as if a bad editor was perhaps worse than no editor. I know that you thank your editor in the book. So what does an editor do for an author?
Well, a good editor is the author's conscience, the author's wiser judgment, the author's sounding board, and the author's friend. My editor, Selina Walker at Cornerstone at Penguin Random House, with whom I've now been for about 8 or 9 books, I think, and probably about 10 years, is my better half in many ways, in the sense that she can see things in the books that I can't. She's not afraid to tell me where something has gone wrong. She often steers me in a completely different direction. If I'm talking about a book in its sort of infancy, in the early stages, she'll say, that's a wonderful idea, or don't do that. That's not going to work. And I listen to her. Now, I don't always agree with her. That's the joy of the relationship, which is, I don't have to do what she tells me. But I would say that 9 out of 10 times, she's right. I mean, the funny thing is, in the book I'm writing at the moment, which is Hawthorne 6, it had a title. And I knew it was a bad title. She loved it. And I just knew it was a bad title. And I couldn't persuade her out of it because she just thought it was absolutely perfect. And finally, I had to do a document for the sales team at the publishing house. And I thought, just with a bit of devilry, I'm going to just change. I'm not going to have that title. I'm going to put a new title on. And I sat back and thought it. And she rang me the next day. She said, "Oh my God, the new title, it's so much better than the old one. I should have seen it." But that's the relationship. She's not cleverer than me. I'm not cleverer than her. We are collaborating. We're working together.
And I like that. I mean, I think that, well, I would assume the average reader doesn't realize how involved the editor can be and should be, especially if you find a good editor.
I think you can tell when an editor has not been present. I think that there are 1 or 2, I would say, massively famous writers, but naming no names, who have become so successful and so wealthy that they have stopped listening to their editors and write what they want to write. And if they are writing series in particular, I think you notice it. I think you feel that there's, if only they hadn't spent so many words on this sequence, or if only this chapter had come a little bit earlier so we'd got into the story, that's where an editor might have been helpful.
I agree with you. I agree. So thinking back to when you were younger, did you have a particular teacher or professor who was very encouraging in your development?
Dan, when I was at school, I went in an English private system here, which means my parents paid for the schooling. And from 8 to 13, I was in a horrific, horrible school, a boarding school, all boys boarding school, brutal atmosphere, vile teachers. And I came out of it a wreck. And I sometimes think I have never fully recovered from that experience. And I have put every single teacher who taught me in that school has appeared in my books. I've killed every single one of them. It's been my sort of, author's revenge. But when I went to my secondary school, which was also private, I was very fortunate. I had 3 absolutely wonderful teachers, to answer your question now, who really did bring out the writer in me. One was Mr. Helliwer, one was Mr. Alden, and one was Mr. Brown. As I speak their names, even 40 years later, I can still see them in my mind's eye. Mr. Helliwell taught English literature, Mr. Alden taught our English language, and Mr. Brown taught drama. And I knew when I went to that school that I wanted to be a writer, but they found the writer and encouraged the writer and made it seem possible. Suddenly I realized that it wasn't just a dream of one day being a published author, but if I, learned what they were teaching me and stuck with it, I would be a successful writer. And it was down to the three of them, but I found my confidence, and I still owe them an enormous debt.
I think that's magnificent. I do think back sometimes on my childhood. Some years I had really great teachers, and some years they weren't so great. I think teaching, someone recently described teaching as a calling. And I think it's almost as if, we use that word for ministers often. But I think a teacher is really the person who gets a calling. I think you have the ability, if you're called to be a good teacher, to really shape the minds of the people who sit in front of you. And when you get a good one, it's magnificent.
I totally agree with what you're saying. And I'm often asked what I would have been if I hadn't been a writer. And although a life without writing is almost impossible to imagine for me, I always say, well, I would have loved to have been a teacher, because actually I think with the satisfaction of being a teacher and the satisfaction of being a successful, certainly children's author, is quite similar. But to actually take somebody who is young and impressionable and who can be influenced and to have the power to change their life in a small way or a big way, and hopefully for the good, is a very, very wonderful responsibility to have. And I think I would have found that very fulfilling.
I love that. So sort of sticking with a children's theme. So early in the book, Susan talks about her nephew and niece who really particularly disliked Alan Conway. And you say, as Susan's little phrase was, we should often listen to children because they have a better sense than adults. So in writing that, was there anything in particular that maybe you were thinking of, or is that just something that you've noticed along the way?
No, it's something from my own life, which is that when I was a kid, I had a sort of an instinctive understanding of evil. So I'll give you some examples of this. There was a very, very popular children's entertainer by the name of Jimmy Savile, who was on television a great deal. Jim Will Fix It was his program, and he was a very strange sort of blonde haired, though it was dyed or it was a wig or both. And he did this children's show where he basically granted wishes. And there was another one, Rolf Harris, who was a sort of a singer, painter, again, very much a children's entertainer. These people were huge in television. They were huge megastars. And I just knew in my heart that they were bad. And sure enough, years later, and I say this with no glee at all because it's sort of sad and awful, both these men were discovered to be predators of the very worst sort, and they were both publicly disgraced. Jimmy Savile had already died. Rolf Harris, they were separate instances. Incidentally, they probably did meet many times, but that's a separate issue. Rolf Harris did go to prison. I think he is now dead as well. But that was what I was thinking of when I wrote that children just know. They don't need to be told, and that was definitely my experience.
I find that children are, in a lot of ways, so much smarter than adults as far as determining how they feel about a situation. Children almost always know instantly what they feel. And I think as adults, sometimes we learn to mask what we feel to fit into society. I mean, I know that's a big generalization, but I find it to be, if a child doesn't like someone, I typically listen because there's a reason. They instinctively know, where adults are taught we have to get along with people.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I will be honest, I wouldn't go that far. Having had two sons myself and having watched them, take against people in a big way, it was a big thing in my house that my children would never, ever play with the children of my friends, because if dad and mum were friends with their dad and mum, that automatically made them not worth considering as friends. Then, of course, as they got older, they realized how stupid they were. And now now many of my friends have children who are friends with my children. Right. And I love to see that, a friendship traveling down the generations. So I don't entirely go the whole way with that. I think I'm talking about something slightly more primal. Children make mistakes. Children can be manipulated and twisted. I mean, that is the whole secret of Alex
True.
Ryeland. He doesn't want to be a spy. He's been trained to be a spy by an uncle who has effectively lied to him all his life. And that, I think, is actually one of the reasons why the books were so successful, was a sort of recognition amongst young readers. But they are always being manipulated. Adults are always lying to them. Adults always have a vision for them that may not be their own vision. And so, although I do subscribe to the idea that children have got an instinct and can be naturally wise in the way that you're suggesting, where adults cover things up and hide things, children are more open, I don't think they're always right.
I can certainly see that. So I know from listening to other interviews that you have an idea book that you fill with ideas when they come to you.
Not exactly. I'm going to stop you there. I never write down ideas.
Oh,
I have a rule, but if an idea is good, it will survive. So if I have an idea for a story, teenage spy, I don't get out a book and write down teenage spy. The idea stays in my head. But what I do write in the book, so you're quite correct. In fact, I have one of them here in front of me right now. What I do write in these books are everything that sort of is going to be inside a book. So there's a page out of one of my earlier books, and you can see on this side here, it's an illustration of how the characters relate to each other. The other side has got a little bit of history of Malta in 1955, although actually the book wasn't set in Malta in the end, so that's an idea that was a waste of time. Well, actually, no ideas are ever a waste of time, but it didn't appear in the book. And underneath some stuff about the German invasion of Greece, and that does appear in Marble Hall Murders.
Okay, I love it. I love it. So, are you an organic writer, or are you a big plotter? Or because I know that these ideas come to you, and I've heard you say that you formulate them in your mind. Do you write organically, or are you a plotter, or both?
I think I'm both. I think that I do an enormous amount of plotting. You take a book like Marble Hall Murders, you've got 2 time frames, 2 different dimensions, fiction and reality. You've got a large family in one side of the book, and you've got the same people as seen by the author on the other side of the book. And so there's a lot going on in it. And without writing everything down, without having a list of all the clues and the connections and sort of the structure of the book, I would be unable to write it. So that is the structuring side of it. The organic side comes when I actually sit down in my office and write. So just today I was writing a chapter, and I had every single beat of the chapter on a page in front of me, so I knew from the beginning to the end what was going to be in it. But that didn't mean that I didn't necessarily follow it all when I was writing it. I wrote organically. What felt right sometimes wasn't what I got on the page, but I go with the flow. I don't go with a sort of a preordained schedule.
I love it. I've heard some authors say that their outlines are 100 pages long, and so when they sit to write the book, it's almost all written. They just have to fill in the extra. And then I've had some authors who've said that they simply don't do any outline at all. And I'm often shocked, especially if it's a complex mystery. I'm like, my goodness, how did you keep all that in mind? And I guess, they just have a great filing cabinet in their mind. So,
well, I mean, I think one of the great things about being a writer is that there are no rules. I've met writers who simply write down the first sentence of their new book and follow where it goes. And some of them, Liz Nugent, a wonderful Irish crime writer, that's how she writes. So she tells me. I think Ian Rankin, the author of Rebus, is the same. And I admire them completely, but it's not how I write. I'm much more methodical and such. But clearly, both techniques work. It's wonderful being a writer because, yes, there are rules, but you can break them and you can live without them. You can do your own thing, And if you are successful, then what you have done becomes the new rules.
That's right. I love it. So, a sideways question: do you have a garden, and do you garden?
I do have a not very large garden out in the front of the back of the house here. No, I do not garden particularly. I water things and I sort of potter about a little bit. But I'm quite nervous of plants. I don't really understand them. I don't know what to do. And I have somebody who comes in and helps me once a week. And he does show me all the flowers and all the different things. He gets quite cross when I can never remember the names.
I always share this. So my mom had the best garden in the little village I grew up in. And the reason she had the best garden is because when she planted a tomato, she expected to get a tomato. She never thought it would be a potato. And that was the way she lived her life. She planted a seed and she wanted that seed to germinate a certain way, even in people, which she had to learn all through her life the hard way that just because you want to plant a seed in a person doesn't mean that's what you're going to get. So,
well, she calls it tomato, you call it potato.
that's it.
So
That's tomato and tomato as well. So, one last question. Where were you when you learned that you were going to be a CBE? Do you find out that through the mail?
I remember very well. I heard, I was here, I was sitting at this very desk. It's not an unlikely occurrence, as I spend about half my life or more sitting where I am now. It was last year, and I was sitting here. It was the evening. I got a phone call. Late afternoon, I got a phone call.
That is absolutely lovely. So, is there a second step? Are you Sir Anthony Horowitz?
No, I'm not Sir Anthony. The way it works, I should tell you today, my younger son, Cassian, has also been given the CB. It took him only 3 years to get his. It took me 30 to get mine. So I'm a little bit,
on the fast track,
green around the gills, but I'm very proud for him and very happy. The way it works is M is the sort of the first rung in the ladder, which is a member of the British Empire. O, which is the Order of the British Empire, is the next step up. Then C, which is Commander of the British Empire. Incidentally, the British don't really have an empire anymore, and we're meant to be a little bit ashamed of ever having had one, but that's a whole different discussion. And then after that, if you are fortunate and if you live long enough, you might then move up to become a K, which is the equivalent of a knight, and then you are Sir whatever. But I'm not expecting that to happen anytime soon. I only got my C last year, and I would have thought even if it were to happen, it would be a healthy 5-year gap.
Well, I hope it comes soon because I think it's well deserved, me personally. So
you're very kind, Dan. If I happen to bump into the King and Queen, I will mention you said this.
Will you please tell them I suggested it? And if they need me to write in, let me know, and I'll happily send them a little note.
You're very kind.
Again, the book is called Marble Hall Murders. It's by Anthony Horowitz. Absolutely wonderful. Cannot be missed. Must read.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at outwithdan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.